Welcome to Please Continue, I'm Listening with Dr. Kathryn Hayward. The COVID-19 pandemic put a hard stop on our Living Whole retreats, and it took me some time to embrace an online format for Living Whole. Does that happen to you? At first you resist change, and then over time you figure out that the change you resisted is actually exactly what you needed. Dr. Colin Campbell's personal story is about being faced with embracing change, and it has not been an easy embrace. Early in his professional development, he discovered things that shook the foundations of his beliefs about health that he had growing up on a dairy farm. For the past 60 years, he's been leading research studies, writing, and speaking about his discoveries that show that dairy and animal products in general cause disease. Not an easy change to embrace. Colin Campbell is one of my favorite people to chat with. I met Colin through Meg Wolf, who was one of the first people in the online world to focus on the link between food and cancer. Meg is now my age, but when she was in her 30s and 40s, she developed 2 different types of cancer, and the second was called incurable by her doctors. She was told to get her affairs in order and prepare her husband and children for her death. In her quest to treat the cancer on her own, she found Colin's work, changed how she ate, and healed herself. I've always been grateful to Meg for sharing her story and for connecting Colin and me together. Colin and I have shared a number of meaningful conversations and conferences over the years, and I'm not alone in regarding Colin as one of the most important pioneers in understanding the links between food and disease. His 2006 book, The China Study, changed my life and the way I practice medicine. In this conversation, Colin and I talk about the relationship between whole plant-based eating and whole health. I love Colin's image of a symphony inside our bodies and how that biological complexity must be acknowledged as the cornerstone of our approach to health. I ask you to excuse the tech glitches in the podcast. Because of the constraints of the pandemic, we met over video conference software and did not have the benefit of a recording studio. Nonetheless, the wisdom offered by Colin and others whom I interviewed is priceless, and these podcasts focus on the relationships between the interests of each guest and the greater universe of health and healing. I hope you enjoy all the podcasts in this series. Dr. Campbell's primary focus is on the association between diet and disease, particularly cancer. His other books include Whole, The Low-Carb Fraud, and The Future of Nutrition. He's featured in several landmark documentaries, including Forks Over Knives and PlantPure Nation. Dr. Campbell has lectured extensively around the world and is the founder of the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies, which offers the online plant-based nutrition certificate in partnership with eCornell. So, Dr. Campbell, please continue. We're listening. Well, this is the first time that you and I've been together where we get to talk about a holistic approach to health. Usually we're focused more on whole food, plant-based eating. And I really appreciate your being here with me and talking with me about international integrators and holistic health. And so I'm wondering how you see the role of whole health being helpful to people during these challenging times.
Well, that's where nutrition comes in, as I'm sure you would expect me to say. But in any case, the whole food plant-based diet does have a very broad effect, for one thing. I mean, it basically is the same sort of strategy with a lot of individual variation, if you wish, but it's the same strategy on heart disease as it does for diabetes, as we think for the most part it does with cancer, chronic kidney disease, you name it. And now, more recently, I've been in quite a round with sharing some data on virus diseases as well. So when you speak of whole health, uh, I think it really is. It has a very broad effect on total health, whole health, however you want to say it. I'm very excited about it after all these years.
Tell me more about what you're doing about viruses, since that is a big topic of conversation these days.
It sure is. Well, to be specific, I get a little background. In 1998, I think it was something like that, the society of which I'm a part, which is the principal research society, held a symposium, and they say, hey, we don't know anything about the role of nutrition on viruses. That was in 1998, and it hasn't changed much since. And of course, the people in the immunology field and other fields too, they don't give any credit to the idea that nutrition has anything to do with this. Well, it turns out that in our China study, done the second time, you probably don't know the fact that it was done a second time, but the second time when we included mainland China and Taiwan, that was done in 1989, we collected a bunch of data again, almost 9,000 people, adults, and we looked at one of the virus-caused diseases, the most serious virus-caused disease. It kills nearly 800,000 people a year in the world. That's hepatitis B virus. And it's been a tough one. Well, in any case, on that, liver cancer, that was one of my specialties in the cancer field, actually. So we collected information at that time, this is now over 30 years ago, on the number of people who had active virus compared to those who had an immunity system, antibodies to the virus. It was amazing, truly amazing, Kathryn. The people consuming, the people who had the antibody or the immunity, if you will, they did not get the liver cancer. They were the ones who ate plants, pure and simple, measured in different ways. And this was not just a blip, a statistical blip. This was consistent across everything we measured about plant foods. In contrast, the people who got the liver cancer, they were the ones consuming animal food. And only a small amount. On average, they're only like 10, maybe 15% of the level of protein we do in here in the States. Yet, at the same time, that was enough to have these people carry around the active virus. And they got the virus. Those who consumed a small amount of animal protein also formed no antibodies. It was stark, absolutely stark. Plants promote immunity, animal foods promote liver cancer. And the ones who got the plants, they didn't get the liver cancer. I've never seen data so striking, so consistent. And we took it back to the lab, and we actually did an animal study too with the hepatitis virus. Mm-hmm. That was in a transgenic mouse model. Their program, actually, we got it from another group, but they're programmed to get the liver cancer, and we fed them different levels of animal protein. The only ones who got the liver cancer were the ones who consumed the animal protein. So, we got it both sides. Now, so the question is, well, what does that have to do with the coronavirus? That's liver cancer. Well, in reality, as you know, all the viruses, they first and foremost, they meet up with our immune system when they infect us. And so they all go through that. All the viruses have different symptoms, obviously. Some are very serious, some less so. That's a given. But they all go through the same immune system. And the immune system is where I think the action is. And it's going to affect one virus and another. If it's going to affect the virus at all, it'll be in favor of forming immunity. And of course, the fact that this kind of diet is also what prevents heart disease and reverses heart disease and chronic kidney disease and so forth and so on is consistent with that model too. So when we did the animal studies, we actually found that the animals that got more protein, they had less killer cells, natural killer cells, which is another sort of part of the puzzle. So they didn't form antibodies, they had less killer cells, and the other ones got the cancer. I probably talked too long, but I can't help it because the amount of data that we had on that was so stark. So I'm basically saying that, I'm suggesting, hypothesizing to say it appropriately, that the same effect will occur on coronavirus individuals too. And as you know, I think also the effect of this diet upon intervention is really rapid. Your cholesterol drops like a rock, as you probably know, in a day or two or three. The requirement for insulin people, if people are on medication, diabetics are on medication, most of them are, the type 2 diabetics, well, both, but if they start the diet, they can go into hypoglycemic shock because the diet is so pronounced that with the combination of the medication and the diet together, they can get blood sugars too low and they're in trouble. So I'm telling you a lot of things you know very well, you know better than I, but that's the nature of our data. And so I'm excited about it.
And
just one more.
How are you getting this message out? Is it in the book that you just published, The Future of Nutrition?
We had in the end a comment about it, but actually it was just published in the EC Nutrition, a good journal, part of the Nature Network. It was just published, which is kind of exciting. It was a bit difficult, I must tell you. People in the profession don't want to hear this, to be honest about it. They just don't want to hear about nutrition, first off. I find it very frustrating. And of course, when you come along and say, hey, nutrition might work for the coronavirus, that's a double whammy. And, they're not inclined to want to believe it. And just because, we never studied it before, but quite frankly, the ones who are saying that have not studied nutrition either. So it's an uphill battle, and I find it frustrating, to be honest about it.
Yeah, well, so much of your career has been marked by saying things that a lot of people find difficult to hear.
Right.
You're such a visionary, and in addition to being a scientist and an author and a philosopher, you're a visionary, and oftentimes visionaries get that kind of reaction.
Well, I still feel like a farm boy.
Do you?
Yeah, I was raised on a farm and milked cows and all that stuff, and I was on the other side of the fence, and I still have my empathy for farming and for farmers, family farmers. So
one thing I've been wondering as we've been going through this pandemic is anybody looking at who's dying and what they eat?
Well, interesting you should ask that question. We've got our nonprofit, as you may know, the online course that Leanne now is the president of. But in any case, we just had a board meeting, 3 or 4 weeks ago, with a new member, an RN. Actually, she's been practicing for, I think, 30 years. There's quite a lot of experience, and she's in charge of a large group of nurses and health counselors in the Midwest. She's now on our board, and I just happened to ask her. She's a very pleasant woman, kind of out there saying things, and I said to ask her. I was asking her the same question. Hey, do you know any way we can find out, who amongst all the so-called plant-based eaters, whether or not they're getting the virus? And she just sent me just yesterday the first round of queries or questionnaires that she sent out. 619 people responded. And they're saying things, the ones who have something to say about it are the ones who said, I got tested and I was positive, I didn't have any problems. And, that's my interpretation too of the stuff that we're talking about. I don't think the plant-based diet is going to prevent infection. I don't see how that can work. But for those who are infected, most everyone who gets in the way, they're the ones that are going to see the benefit. So I just wrote back to her again last night, giving her some advice on some new ways of going about that poll in a more thoughtful way, a little more careful way. And we're just going to see what we get out of it. She says she has access to something like 4 million people, a lot of people. So she hasn't sent it out to all those people yet, of course.
Yeah.
She's just doing a little trial balloon at the moment. But so far, for what it's worth, it's encouraging.
Well, there's so much to know, not only the issues that you brought forward with your hepatitis B research, you know, what happens to natural killer cells and what happens to antibodies, but also how does vaccine respond in particular people depending on what their diets are.
For sure. I'm writing another article that I finished, and I've been wanting to send it to the New Yorker, one of my favorite medical public journals. We'll see where it goes. But in any case, the question concerning the effect of nutrition on the vaccine, efficacy, if you will, I put that in there. I said, I said the same thing. We don't really know in this case what kind of interaction may occur there. But I would hope it'd be reasonable, and see why it wouldn't be, why it would be different. But anyhow,
I'm so glad. Well, your research has really helped us see how once the immune system gets activated, what happens if people are mostly plant-based, and what happens if people are eating animal foods. That in terms of the effectiveness of how the immune system is able to deal with infections.
Right. Right. Have you had any experience with viral diseases, or had you in the past?
With viral diseases as a physician?
As a physician, in regards to nutrition, you probably have not had much, but
it's all anecdotal. But
yes,
as I've mentioned to you in prior conversations, my life changed, like so many people, when the China study got published and I read it, and my way of practicing medicine completely changed. And so as I got more and more of my patients that I was caring for paying attention to moving their diets toward whole food plant-based, my anecdotal experience was that people got sick less. Totally anecdotal. I can't give you statistics. I know I got sick less, and all of my family members who were eating this way got sick less. But to delve into it in the way that you have done it scientifically is very helpful, because we can then reconcile our personal anecdotal experience with something that the science helps us understand.
Right. Of course, I'm not a physician, and I didn't have patients, obviously, but in a similar vein, I mean, I got into science, of course, as I did, and started learning things. But at the same time, when I was becoming more familiar with this information, we all changed our diets, as you know, Karen and I, and family, all that sort of stuff. So on a personal side, all anecdotal, obviously, I can't believe the effect, hardly. I'm going to be, what's today? It's Friday. On Sunday, I'm going to be 87.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. But in any case, and Karen is just turned 80. And we had some experiences that you probably recall. Karen was diagnosed with stage 3 melanoma at one point. And the oncologist wanted to be very aggressive with her, start treatment with chemotherapy, and also remove the lymph glands, the lymph gland base in that area of her body. And so she just said no, she wasn't going to do any of that. And it was really I was a little bit even surprised at his reaction. He was pretty nasty, very threatening. Almost say, "You come back here in 6 months, I won't be able to do anything for you." Very aggressive. And that's been, I suppose this was knock on wood, but She's had no problem since. And, my situation, just to follow on that too, my dad, a farmer, but in really good health otherwise, not overweight and very active, at least always outdoors. He was eating the wrong food, as we were in a family, lots of fat and dairy and meat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He had a heart attack when he was 62, and a fatal attack when he was 70. Surprised all of us. This many years ago, of course. His brother had a fatal attack when he was 58. And so their father, my grandfather, he had a stroke when he was 74. So I was conscious of this. It's kind of in my family. And my mother, on her side, she had very high cholesterol levels, above 300. That's where she was. She didn't have the heart problem, but she had a lot of arthritic and a lot of difficulty later in her life. So I always kind of say, try to get my picture straightened out in a sense of who I am, who's my background, wasn't my background. And I figured that I got a little bit of risk for heart disease according to family tradition. And my wife's mother died when she was 51 from colon cancer. And she lost her brother also in his 50s. So we've always reckoned with the fact that on her side, there seems to be cancer. On my side, there's more heart disease. So we said, we go with what we got here. Now it's becoming more meaningful the older we get. It's really quite nice.
Well, that's such a beautiful illustration of what I hear a lot from patients. They get, I think there's been a tendency to get caught up in the idea that your genetic makeup and the genes that you inherit from your family are sort of like the hard drive on a computer, and it's sort of, your fate. This is what people in our family, this is what happens to us. Right. And the research that you've done helps us see that it's not that way at all, that there's, software, if you will. And if you want to eat whole food, plant-based, you can make things go in a very different direction. And your story and Karen's story are two examples of that. I'm sure you have many more that you've heard.
Yeah, I like this idea, this whole question concerning nature versus nurture. If you will, has been, ancient, millions, thousands of years old almost. That argument's going on forever. And I kind of got caught up in it now because experimentally, at least, we can create, we can make genes the way they're damaged. We can mutate genes. That's a starting place for cancer and lots of other things. And it turns out that's not enough. It may be a starting place, but we don't have to let them keep on running down the road. We can halt them, keep them in place, and not suffer the consequences. There's a guy, Kathryn, I've recently met only, over the internet, kind of interesting. He's a philosopher in England. And that's where he lectures, he does these kind of things. So he has some reputation. And he got excited about the fact that, or worried actually about the fact that BBC, I don't know whether you know that story or not, BBC really tried to do a number on me.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Well, this is now about 3 years ago, 3-4 years ago, something like that. They called up one day and wanted to do a special, on the China studies and so forth, and wanted to know if I would agree to hear them out. And I said, yeah, okay. I thought it was going to be a reasonable interview. They sent over their team, and I met them, and actually at Esselstyn's place, because I was passing through, so they combined a visit with me with Esselstyn at his house. And so they spent a couple of hours with me riding around on a golf court in an orchard. and the guy who was interviewing me was on the faculty at Cambridge University. Some distinction, but he was all genetics. Okay. And he reminded me in the very beginning, at the beginning of the interview, he said, I'm a carnivore and I'm not going to change. When I said, okay, that's your choice, whatever. But so he kept poking away at me, as we were riding around the field. He says, do you realize that China study is being seen by a lot of people? He says, you got to be responsible. And he kept telling me, are you sure? He was critical, to put it mildly, in a kind of professional way. And they had out in the front of the golf cart a film crew riding a separate thing, and they were filming me. They were hooked into the office back in London. So while this is going on live, the group in London were firing questions at me too.
Huh.
And so that went on for a couple of hours, and then and finally I decided, well, yeah, I didn't know where he really was at the time. It was, in the end, he was trying to be polite, but he was going then back to the Esseltons, and there he wanted to interview my friend, Colin Esselton, and who's in heart disease, as you know. And he had brought to his house 3 of his best spoken people. One of them is director of a pretty high position in Pentagon. It was a woman, very impressive, successful woman. The other 2, likewise, they had heart disease. They got reversed and all that. They told their stories, very moving stories, I might tell you. And so while he was interviewing them, and we're listening to that and watching it, I could tell he didn't particularly care for what they were saying. So a couple of months went by. He went off, and they then did the film, and they had joined up with CNN, and that film was going to be shown across the country here in the States. And of course, it already had been shown in the UK. And so I saw the film, and it really was. They were trying to associate me with a couple of people who had been thrown out of their profession and had spent some time in prison. They were trying to present me as one of those characters. And of course, I saw it. This was on a Tuesday. And I was told, yes, I heard this, CNN was prepared to air it on Saturday of that week. So I quickly wrote a note back to the BBC organization. The one is called, what's it called? Horizon, I think it is, the program. Quite a nice program. I heard it many times. I wrote back to him and said, I told him my concern. You're just trashing me. This is out of order. Stop it, essentially. Well, CNN didn't run it. They didn't run it. But the guy did ask. He said, why didn't you complain? Why didn't you say something before? I said, well, how did I know? I said, I'm going to post this article of mine on my website. He said, well, I'd like to make a reply. I said, that's fine. Send her your letter. So it was posted. In the meanwhile, I'm sorry to go on so long about this, but it's kind of crazy.
It's a crazy story.
So in the meanwhile, 2 people contacted me from the UK. One is a philosopher. He was really upset, and he wanted to go. He was ashamed at BBC's behavior. So he went to the government, watchdog group, I think it's called, or something like that. He also went to the Parliament, complained, they wanted the Parliament to take up this matter. Because BBC is it's a government organization, essentially. And so he tried that. He was turned down twice by the watchdog group, believe it or not. They wouldn't even consider it. The other guy, a younger guy, 26 years old, young journalist, very well spoken, very well educated at that point. He wrote to me independently from the first guy and said, he had been following that interviewer at Cambridge, following him around because he was going around Europe and a few lectures and saying, I got Campbell to admit he had no data. That's what he said. And so this young journalist, he heard he might have a chance to interview him at a conference coming up. And so the interviewer, the Cambridge guy, his name was Yeo, Y-E-O, Chinese English, I guess you could say. And he had a chance to interview him on stage in front of the audience. And that was filmed. And so he starts talking to him and praising him, make a nice conversation with him. And finally said, do you think, this is a genetics conference, by the way. He said, do you know, there's some evidence that it doesn't quite work that way, whatever. He kind of was, finally the guy from Cambridge, he got a little bit nervous. He said, you talking about Campbell in the US or something like this? He said, yes. And then a couple more questions. The guy got up and walked off the stage. And so, and then I started to look at some of his own research. And that's true. What he was doing, he's working with Sanofi Aventis, the big drug company in Germany.
Okay.
The drug company got together with BBC. They got together with, a respectable person from Cambridge University. And then, of course, they were part of the government. So it was a combination of industry, big drug company, fifth largest, I'm told at that time in the world, fifth largest. And a well-known university, Cambridge, of all places, for crying out loud. And they were really had joined hands to create this product. And so, and meanwhile, all this is going on. The philosopher, he goes back, he writes a book. Now he's written a book. He's trying to get it published. And I think it's fantastic. His favorite topic is Paleolithic art, cave art in Spain and elsewhere. And his thesis is that he's asking questions. Why have we gone nuts? Why have we gone so crazy? What is it about the human race? He's not a nutritionist himself. He is vegan, so he has an interest in this area. So he writes the book, and very well written. I read the manuscript. And he argues that it's kind of interesting that if you may know this, being there in near Spain, or in Spain, essentially where you are.
Yeah.
There was some caves in Spain some years ago that were discovered.
Yeah.
Quite a number of years ago. I forget the name of them, but made a lot of news, I'm sure, as you know.
Yeah.
And there's a number of people have sort of gone to the cave and studied the art to see what was being said and so forth. And some of the art that was there on that cave wall was before the last ice age. Mm-hmm. What they learned, you may know this already, I didn't know it was new to me, but what they learned from that cave art prior to the last ice age was that humans were more, it seemed to appear that humans acknowledged that they were part of nature, they were just another animal, that sort of thing. And it wasn't until after the ice age was over, when a new round of cave artists came along. And then they started doing things to indicate that the humans were apart from nature. They were violent, they could kill. So this whole sort of history, Paleolithic history, okay, I guess is the right word, so maybe one time we were, before the last ice age, a little more respectful of nature and each other. Whereas after the cave age, whatever happened, I don't know that part of the story, but ego took over. And, we also became sort of violent. I don't know, it sounds like he hasn't got his book published yet, but it's very well written. He's just no replies in the last chapter.
Well, it goes along with something that I've been thinking a lot about during the pandemic. Actually, I was thinking about it for a lot of years while I was practicing medicine too, which is, when did we decide that the way that the immune system and infectious agents connect with each other inside of our bodies ought to be in a battle paradigm? When did that happen? And does it make sense to have it be a battle paradigm? And I was thinking about this, especially as I was reflecting on all of the work that you've done over the years, and especially your book Whole, and the idea of holism with a W. And is there a way for us, first of all, is it beneficial to us to have this battle paradigm be the way that we think about dealing with viruses? Or would it make more sense if we think about there being a system that works as a whole? And one of the things that has caught my eye over the year that I've been reading more and more about viruses is that there's a significant percentage of human DNA that has virus DNA in it. You probably know this. And when I began thinking about it, I realized, well, viruses that were on the planet about 3.5 billion years before humans ever evolved. So sort of makes sense that we incorporated some viral DNA into us. And then this whole idea of genes that are able to, parts of DNA are able to jump from one place to another. Is there a way that it makes sense for us to use our philosophical abilities and say, let's get rid of this battle paradigm and look at the virus as it connects with our immune system in some way that doesn't involve a battle, in some way that involves the wisdom of the body as it has evolved, and allowing the body to do its work to strengthen the parts of us, which we call the immune system, strengthen the parts of us to sort of usher the virus out, but without this concept of violence, without this concept of there has to be a winner and a loser. What do you think about that?
You said it really well. I'm not experienced in virology for sure, and I really agree with you. We all know, of course, that viruses have been living on the earth far before we ever came around. They're here and they're going to stay here. They're not going to disappear. If we look at it sort of the competition between living forms, maybe to some extent, viruses are doing their thing. We're trying to do our thing as mammals. But the viruses, if I can add, if there's a good part of that, they infect us, they cause mutations, they do this and that. So the changes that occur may be incorporated in our genes. And if they're good, okay, we benefit.
Right.
If they're not, and since they're strange, the body would sort of say, hey, I want it. We don't need you around here. But on the other hand, the viruses, some have called it the engines of evolution. They're kind of poking away at us over the millions or hundreds of thousands, millions of years, I guess, to try to find a home for themselves. That's where they tend to live, and they replicate that way. But they can do damage. Sometimes the damage might, on occasion, be okay. Most of it is probably not too good, nasty maybe. And so the immune system evolved. I can't say it better than we used it. It evolved, in a sense, to deal with it. Not only with the viruses, but also with bacteria and neoplastic tissue as well. This forms, endogenously, if you will. And so the immune system is a really impressive system, very complex, but it's adaptable. The amazing thing about the immune system, I think, when I think about it, is that it's so adaptable. The way it can sort of, adapt to, let's say, new virus, new organism, and create, some machinery to take care of it. So I think it's a marvelous system, but how it came about, I guess, is not clear, but it may have been just the mechanism that humans devised. Not just humans, but obviously animals, they devised to protect themselves against those little bugs, if we call them that.
Well, you talk a lot about reductionist ways of looking at nutrition and how we need to think much more holistically. One of the beautiful terms that I came across in your writing had to do with the word symphony, that food is a symphony and that our bodies experience food as a symphony. And so as I was thinking about all this stuff about the battle paradigm, I was looking back at when did we really start talking about the experience between the human body and an infection in this battle paradigm. And it seemed like one of the big contributors was when penicillin got discovered accidentally, and that happened in the late 20s. And by the time World War II was kind of finishing up, there had been enough of an industry to create penicillin that soldiers were being treated with it, and it really kind of changed the course of things during that war. But it kind of was poignant for me that penicillin got figured out between two world wars, and that's when this battle paradigm really took off. And so by the time World War II finished, anybody that had the power of penicillin, in other words, physicians, could give you your shot of penicillin if you had an infection. Those people then got put onto this sort of pedestal and were dealt with reverence, because these infections that had just wreaked havoc in all of humankind for so long, suddenly it was like a miracle. Things could get better. So then we got, I think, into these decades of physicians having this idea that they had, hierarchically they were in a more superior place. And it's always felt to me like a lot of the criticism that you have gotten, that you've had to deal with throughout these decades of your important work, has come from that place of, instead of being, your approach has been, I was a farm boy, I started discovering this stuff, and I made changes, and here's what I learned. It was a very beautiful story of curiosity driving the boat. And I think many of us who practice medicine and who go through the medical system, we come at things from the point of view, not so much of curiosity, but as we know the answer. We're the people who have the penicillin, so to speak. And so if somebody comes along like you who's being curious and discovering things and then sharing those discoveries, that is very off-putting for many people who have this other mentality.
Well, coming from a physician, I hope I will want to record what you just said.
Oh,
you said
well, we're being recorded.
Now, the way you described it, really, really good. And of course, coming from your background, from the clinical point of view, to sort of show this history in that fashion. So I'm looking at it from the outside and sort of seeing something similar. But have you read my new book? Probably not.
No, over here we can't get it. We can't get the hard copy. So I've got it on Kindle, and I haven't had a chance to download it yet, but I will.
Oh, okay. In any case, the reason I mention that is because I go into the history, quite frankly, on the field of nutrition and cancer, those two. I mean, that's in my sort of area. And I did that when I was at Oxford University for a year back in the 80s. And at that time, I had just been on a National Academy panel, and that's when it really was thrown at me. It was nasty. And when I spent my year at Oxford, it was there as a full-fledged attack on who I was, stealing money, all kinds of really terrible nonsense. And I got a little discouraged at first, but then I said, I'd like to turn this into something positive. So I got in the libraries in London and Oxford and tried to understand, or tried to figure out, why are people so hostile into this idea of nutrition, especially nutrition and medicine. And I worked at a couple of libraries in London too, in Oxford. I found something that was so fantastic. Yes, and the new book is about that. There was two theories in the 1800s at that time, that it was started in the late 1700s. But in the 1800s, some physicians, they called themselves surgeons in those days in the UK. But in any case, one view was that cancer is a constitutional disease, involving something bigger and larger, involving the whole body, which I found kind of intriguing. And the other was the so-called local theory of disease. Well, you can probably guess the answer to that. The local theory of disease, the ones that was taken up by the surgeons. When they're talking about cancer, they said, no problem here, we'll just cut it out. And so the constitutional people, that would have been where we might talk about nutrition, for example. And that was kind of thrown off to the side, except in one regard, and I'll mention it in a moment. But the local theory of disease then gradually became the basis of corporate America in the health sector, at least in the late 1800s. So they took this very simple, straightforward idea, targeted, if you will, and then came along radiation therapy, the Curies, in France. And so they talked about taking radiation and make a really narrow beam to try to hit specifically the cancer in that case. And then eventually in the late 1915s, 20s or so, they got into the idea of using chemicals, targeted chemicals, to treat this cancer. All the while, by the way, whether they were explicitly saying this or not, they weren't explicitly saying it, but there was a presumption that cancer just happens in some people, from a bad seed, genes, obviously. And if they got the gene and the gene doesn't reverse, once a genetic-based disease starts to progress forward, we're done, unless we can kill those cells. Right. So that led to the whole idea, the drugs that we're going to use to treat cancer are cytotoxic. That's where it all came from. We're going to kill cancer cells. And so the local theory of disease became almost the groundwork for the entire field of medicine, for one thing. It also became part of the field of which I'm a part, because nutrition started to be discussed a little more seriously in the 1915s, the 20s in that area. And they were presuming that we could describe whatever nutritional effects exist, we could describe it in terms of single nutrients. Because there's this tendency to want to talk about something in very detail like that. So in research, we did that. We focused on one nutrient at a time, for example, one mechanism at a time. In the clinical areas, it was all about identifying specifically which disease you're talking about. They're all different. And we find a specific therapy, targeted possible. And so we had the two sort of movements, whether you're in medical research or whether you're in medical practice. They're sort of beginning to own the same concept, local theory of disease. Yes. It's a fantastic story. So I tell that quite a bit in my new book. And then I sort of ask the question, well, if that's true, if that's a proper interpretation, how did that get threaded into our existing systems? Well, it's pretty easy to see. It really is easy to see. I mean, we came, especially because the local theory of disease idea, talking about single things, single causes, single treatments, single events, especially because we can identify a single mechanism, then we got an opportunity to make a drug, get that mechanism. So it was all this unitary kind of philosophy, focus one thing at a time, whether it's the cause or whether it's the event or whether it's the outcome. And that just became who we, in our professions, that's the way we became. And in the meanwhile, the nutritionists kind of having their heyday in the 1920s, discovering a vitamin here and there, because that suited the local theory of idea, which was an overstretch, to say the least. In any case, they forgot about what nutrition is all about, which is the combination of all things working together, involving, endless mechanisms and having a very generalized effect. And so that's what I'm talking about in the new book, actually. So it's very consistent with what you just said. I could take in your words and okay, I'm going to put this little audio in here just to hear it because it's perfect. I couldn't agree with you more. So we got caught in, all of us did, whether we're people in the public or whether we're professionals, whatever, we got caught in this system of belief system that makes money, by the way. It makes money. It's very difficult to make money on holistic ideas.
Yeah, and I think it's in part because we like things simple. I mean, it's nice. Right. It's nice if there's just one answer, And to think about things in a broader way is harder. It takes more education, or at least it takes more kind of intuition.
Right.
And especially I think that's gotten more pronounced in the age of social media and so forth, where people are less likely to sit and have a long discussion like you and I are having and pay attention to it. They want sound bites. They want things very, very easily digested.
Right, precisely. Can I add, I think that we both made references, the single agent kind of thing, or the single cause, whatever, that really went well in the economic system we have, in large measure because of intellectual property protection laws, with patents, copyrights, trademarks, stuff like that. My brother was an attorney, we used to talk about this quite a bit. And so the involvement, or the development essentially of the capitalist system from the 1800s onwards, a way had to be found for people with bright ideas to be able to make some money with those ideas. So the intellectual property activity really sprung up, especially during the late 1800s, and became part of the fabric of our entire economic system. And so local theory of disease idea also is really supported tremendously by our views about the economy. We subsist on ideas that can't be protected, otherwise we can't sell them. And of course, on that point, natural things can't be patented. So nutrients, for example, even though there was a time, and still is more or less, take a single nutrient, put it in and get it patented, can't work quite that way because it's natural. So what the tendency was, as I'm sure you're aware, is to make a chemical derivative of the original nutrient. Now you got something new. Yeah. Like an acetate or some kind of other salt or something of the nutrient. And so I can sort of see the field of economics threading into this, and as well as the practice, as well as the research. We're all caught up in the same sort of phenomenon. And I think somehow we always pay a lot of attention to nature. I think.
Well, and that's what you and Nelson really explored in PlantPure Nation, the economic and political forces that are keeping the message of truth from being disseminated.
Right. And I think right now, Kathryn, we're often put up with that. I can see it, AIDS, the whole idea of considering even the possibility of nutrition maybe having something to do with viral activity. I mean, it's like a foreign concept to most people. It's like something out of space or something, different planet. And so they're not inclined to want to hear anything about that. Well, they merrily go on trying to figure out how to develop the next vaccine for the next virus that comes along, or the mutant, or whatever it happens to be. And so now, I just saw this 2 or 3 times recently. It's kind of scary. It seems to me, masking, social distancing, and vaccinations, and monitoring. And, I'm not opposed to. I don't come from that point of view. I'm automatically opposed to all that. But I think that when we look at it realistically and know at the same time that system sort of blocks out other considerations, we have problems. Yeah. We have problems. So I can't go down that road. And I hear some commentators, pretty serious commentators, saying we just might have to live with masking. We might have to live with this, going to the future. That's the way it is. Like all of a sudden we had this brilliant discovery recently that there is such a thing as a virus. That's, as you know, that's kind of an old idea, but it seems like the public just get warmed up to the idea. Viruses are kind of nasty. We have to figure out some way to do away with them. Maybe once and for all, but that whole sort of paradigm, thinking that way for the future, I don't like it. Because we get caught then in not even wanting to talk about possible science and what it might mean for some other ways of thinking.
There's an article that just came out today, I think it's in the Atlantic, that focuses on New Zealand. I've been very fascinated to watch throughout the whole pandemic which countries have been able to, manage this virus differently than we have in Europe and differently than the United States has done. And New Zealand has really fascinated me right from the start, in part because we have some friends who live there, so we were kind of hearing it as it was evolving, but also because of their prime minister. I just think she's incredibly articulate and started out right from the beginning saying we're going to do both things. We're going to take care of human health and we're going to take care of our economy. This is not a either or thing. We're going to do both.
Right.
And this article is written by two people from New Zealand, one who's living in United States and one who's still in New Zealand. And they talk about how the reason that New Zealand has done so well, and they've been able since last May to basically have normal life, and nobody's masked, and they've got certain ways of dealing with people who get sick that are very clear cut and everybody understands. There are hotels that are set up and people are fed properly and all of that. But for the most part, life is normal there. And they were saying that a lot of that has to do with a Maori philosophy of community. That there's a sense that is well respected and well accepted in the population, that community has to be considered as a top priority, that whatever an individual does has to have a good impact on the community. And so they were contrasting that with the thing that United States is so proud of, which is our individualism, and how our individualism has created the chaotic situation, or has at least contributed to the chaotic situation in the United States and in a lot of other places. So it comes back to that symphony idea, that holism idea that we've been talking about, that as soon as you go reductionist, as soon as you go duality, as soon as you start trying to look at individual things and only pay attention to those things, you can really get off track very fast.
Well, I'm just curious. What is your sense of the success of New Zealand? I mean, what's the takeaway message? Why were they more successful than the rest of us?
The first thing they did was they closed the borders. They're able to do that because they're an island.
Right.
I live on an island. I told everybody here, let's close the borders. But they said, oh no, our economy. And the place is a mess right now here. But they closed the borders and they put in testing right away.
Okay.
And they designated certain hotels as being places where if you got sick, that's where you went. If you didn't have someone at home that could care for you.
Right.
Jacinda Ardern was on daily, was on the news with somebody from public health and a physician. So she was drawing from the medical community and the public health community. Her message was always, we're in this together. And one of the things I loved that she said was, assume you have it. Behave as if you have it. And so they required people to be in what they called bubbles. They sort of defined what those were, household groups, or if you lived alone, you could find somebody that you could bubble with. Unlike what happened, at least here in Spain, where we had 9 weeks of lockdown. We couldn't go outside except for particular trips, like to the grocery store, but the police were out there making sure that's what you did. You went to the grocery store, you came home. Unlike that, in New Zealand, people could be outside. They had to be outside within their bubble, and if they passed another bubble, they had to be 2 meters away from that other bubble. But exercise, moving the body, was something that they said, this is an important part of getting through this. Not only if you may have the virus, but just to have your mental health be able to get through this period. You have to be able to be outside, be connected to nature. So those are some of the main features that I recall being very admiring of when they were first being developed.
They were doing something early on that was helpful, I'm sure, and then just protecting themselves from outside stuff.
Yeah, by the time it reached New Zealand's shores, it had already been in a couple other places, and so they looked at that and they learned from it, as opposed to, putting blinders on about it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. By the way, that Symphony idea, I was lecturing. There's this cruise we have.
Yes.
In the Caribbean. Were you on that before?
No, I was supposed to go, and something else came up. I had another conference conflict or something, but someday I'll come with you.
In any case, I've lectured to, I think it was 13 years, the first one I've missed in some time, but there was I was lecturing once, 3-4 years ago, I guess now, and sitting in the audience was a man who came up to me after the lecture, really well-spoken, very impressive man, his wife, who introduced himself. He was probably the greatest cello player in the Western world for quite a while. He was accompanied for Pavarotti. He was from Israel initially, and he was in Berlin, Philharmonic, London. He was a child prodigy playing under at Carnegie Hall under Leonard Bernstein. And then he spent most of his career playing first cello in Cleveland orchestras, the Toronto Orchestra. Anyhow, for me, it was so exciting.
Oh, yeah.
Because he came up and he was really emotional about it. Because I was trying to describe this holism thing in the context of a great symphony or a great piece of art. We don't worry too much about the little tiny little strokes, but we have to know something about them, or the tiny little notes. But when we put the whole thing together, something miraculous happens. And he got so excited about it. He came back the next year after that. He then said, I want to come and, his wife, incidentally, is a very established composer as well. And so she plays the guitar, and the combo is unbelievable. So he lives in Toronto now, or he did at that time. And he wanted to fly down, he has his own plane. He wanted to fly down to where we live in New York and play in my house. It was so, this is almost surreal. It's just hard, I can't even really describe it. So he comes down, our house is a log type house. He thought the acoustics in that were perfect just for that purpose. And so he played in our living room, just in front of 10 of us, he and his wife.
Oh.
They were so fantastic.
Well, the story that you've just told makes me want to share with you that we've a little bit modified our Living Whole program this time around, the one that's coming up that you're part of, to include music and writing and art and photography and filmmaking, because
Wow.
we've always had what we call mind, body, spirit disciplines that help us connect our mind, bodies, and spirits. And
Right.
historically, we've used the ones that people think of sort of for their health, acupuncture or chiropractic or Jin Shin Jitsu or those types of things, meditation, mindfulness. But as this pandemic has gone forward, it's really become apparent to me that we need other things to help us with our minds, bodies, and spirits. And where do we always look when we're in a time of crisis? we look to our artists and our musicians and our writers and, you know, our creative people to help us make sense of what we're going through right now.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. It's going to be held there in.
It's all online. This program. This program. We, you know, normally, as you know from doing that one retreat with me, I love being in person, but
Sure.
It's just not possible right now. So we're putting the whole thing into an online format. So most of it is pre-recorded. Like this will be one of the offerings that we will have on the site, our conversation. And then we have live events. So for people, you know, if participants say, oh, I really want to have, you know, some time with a particular facilitator, we'll go to that facilitator and ask, would you be willing to give 30 minutes or an hour, and we bring a group together.
Right.
But since we have a global community, we need to have those be, you know, not the bulk of the program, because sometimes you have to get up at 4 a.m. to be able to be with somebody.
Right. Well, all right. All very nice.